Now, there's no professor of medicine anywhere in the world who can say that, because the moment he says that, his career is ended. It's professional suicide to say that. I can say it because I'm no longer in the profession and I've got all the evidence. But so that's the problem. So the reason why this diet is sustained is because the politicians and the academics are controlled by industry.
Hello, my name is Donald, and welcome to the #1 media company, WorldView. At WorldView, we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. Today, we're going to chat with Professor Tim Noakes. The professor holds numerous degrees relating to sports science, and he currently serves as an Adjunct Professor at CPUT. The professor has published more than 750 scientific books and articles, and he has founded the Noakes Foundation, an organization focused on providing high-quality research for his prescribed diet. Professor, good afternoon. It's always great to have you back on the show. So the first question, I love running, and it's very frustrating to me when people say running is bad for your legs. And I know, I think you also love to jog. I think you have also done a few marathons. And I thought it would be great to ask you, is there any science behind the argument that running is bad for your legs in the long term?
You know, I think you have to look at the total picture. On balance, running is very good for you. It's very healthy, and it's also healthy people choose to run, which is also important. You know, we realize behavior is the key. The way you behave in life determines the outcome. And people who behave in certain ways, and amongst them are runners who are committed and disciplined people, are disciplined in everything they do. So the benefits they get are not just from the running, it's from their personality of being disciplined, focused people. So I think a lot of people get scared because they see runners are disciplined, and then they've got to say, well, you know, I don't like to be disciplined. I'm not as disciplined as you. So therefore what you're doing is going to be wrong for you. The reality is there is going to be some damage if you're going to run for 70 years and run marathons every weekend for 70 years, you will suffer damage. So the key is you don't do that. You rather restrict the amount of exercise or weight-bearing exercise that you do. There is evidence, and if you read my book, Law of Running, you'll say the 10th rule is running doesn't cause osteoarthritis. Unfortunately, that's not true. It does. It is associated with osteoarthritis, but so is squash, so is fast bowling and cricket. Some of the worst osteoarthritis we see is in squash players. But you never hear people saying, oh, you mustn't play squash because you get osteoarthritis. No, you must play squash because you get so much enjoyment and health benefits from it. So the answer is that you should balance your running over 70 or 80 years and don't do it all in 10 years. Which is what we used to do. You know, we thought you had to run a marathon every weekend, or at least every month. And so we overdid it, and now we have to adjust for that. But I think if you combine running with swimming and cycling and other activities, you can go 80 years without developing serious leg problems.
So would cycling be a much safer way of exercising?
Yeah, it's definitely less damaging to your joints, particularly the knees and the hips. Those are the ones that cause problems in people who run. And again, let me emphasize, we're talking about people who run mega distances, and not go out for a 5K run once a week. That's not going to cause any damage. It's people who run 100 kilometers a week for 20 or 30 years and include amongst that many marathons. That's the type of person who could possibly develop some degree of osteoarthritis. But again, not every runner does it. I ran 70 marathons. I don't have any osteoarthritis. So why, you know, there's still a genetic component. You've got to have some weakness plus all the running, and then you might get the problem. So cycling, yes, cycling is fantastic activity, but it doesn't develop your bone strength. It doesn't develop your muscles. And so it has problems as well. There's no one sport that you can do that covers everything that you need to be covered.
And obviously your diet will also be very important in your bone health. We touched on the subject last time when we interviewed
Yeah.
you, when we talked about Alzheimer's and cancer. And there's some connection between the high carb diet and Alzheimer's and cancer. What specifically is that connection?
Okay, so the connection we have is with a condition called insulin resistance, which I have. I'm the classic example of someone who can't tolerate carbohydrates. And what happens is when I take carbohydrate in the form of bread or pasta or rice or potatoes, my body can't assimilate that carbohydrate. So I get this huge spike in glucose, which is very damaging. Glucose damages arteries by itself. And then you compound it because you secrete this hormone insulin, which compounds the problem. So every time you eat those things, you damage your arteries and you damage other parts of your body. And you start to lay down fat in your liver, in your intestine, and ultimately in your subcutaneous fat tissues. And that then causes an inflammatory response. And that's the insulin resistance caused by genetics, plus also this high carbohydrate diet. And you can get away with it for 10 or 15 years or 20 years. So the high carbohydrate diet that runners are told to eat, they can do it for 20 years. But by the time they're 40 or 45, they start putting on weight, they're slowing down, and they start to develop pre-diabetes and other conditions. And so that's the concern. And, I didn't realize that till I was 60. And because my profession didn't warn me that this low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet is the worst thing in the world if you've got insulin resistance. If you're incredibly healthy, if you're the 10% of people who are incredibly healthy, that diet's going to be fine, perhaps. But if you're the majority of us, which is 90%, you eat that diet, it's going to cause you a whole range of diseases. So what I learned, when I first started this thing, I thought as long as you run your marathon once a month, you're going to live forever. And now I realize that's nonsense. As long as you eat the right diet every day, every meal, then you can live a decent, long life. And so nutrition is much more important than exercise. And that doesn't mean exercise isn't important. It just means that you must get the diet right first, and then you will benefit even more by adding the exercise to it. But the exercise cannot correct the problems the diet is doing to you.
So you get the cancers or the Alzheimer's disease because of the damage glucose does to your cells.
And insulin. And it's the spike. So what happens is, and if people are listening and they want to know if they're healthy, they should ask their doctor to measure their fasting insulin. That's very important. And fasting insulin must be below 5 units. And very few South Africans have a fasting insulin below 5. And that means all that group if you're above 5 with a fasting insulin, you're at risk of all these diseases: diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's, obesity, all those other conditions. And they're all linked directly to this too much insulin in the bloodstream.
So, Professor, obviously there's a lot of meat in the Banting diet. And the environmentalists and the vegetarians say it's terrible to consume meat because that's how you damage the climate. So what would be the argument against that?
Well, firstly, as a scientist, when you hear someone say there's climate change, you have to say, okay, so how do you define climate change? And then they say, oh, well, it's all these tsunamis and all this thing that's happening and the hurricanes. So then you look at them, actually, they're fewer than there's ever been. And so you said, well, okay, that's not a problem. Oh, well, then it's the temperature of the water is rising. And so last week, they discovered that 140 years ago, the reefs, the Great Barrier Reef, the water temperature was identical to what it is today. And then I forget which town, which country or state it is in the US, they've had the same temperatures this year as they had 200 years ago. It's exactly the same temperatures. So you have to say, what does global warming mean? The climate changes. I mean, 100,000 years ago, 150,000 years ago, if you were living in Africa, there were theoretically only 6,000 people living in Africa, and they were all living in caves in the Eastern Cape, near Mossel Bay. That was all of society had come down to the small population because the weather was so cold and the water had disappeared right miles down out because the water had now gone dry. Had been taken up at the poles because the poles were so cold. That's climate change. That's real climate change. The sea level was 100 meters lower than it is today. 100 meters. Yet, if you look at the water level today, it has not changed in 100 years. So people, when they say there's climate change, I want to know exactly what do you mean and how do you measure it? And on the measurements that people are using, there hasn't been any change in the last 100 years. Now, there are fewer cows around than there were bison in the 1800s. There were 60 million bison in America. There are not 60 million cows. So why didn't the bison cause climate change in 1800s? So it's all nonsensical, but it's all tied up to something which is much more worrying, and that is the global stealing away of democracy and replacement with totalitarianism. And that's what the goal is. So you have to go a long way to know that COVID and climate change are two components of the same thing. They are an attempt to take away all our democratic freedoms. And it's being driven by about 3,000 people in the world. And unfortunately, they captured the vegetarians, and the vegetarians are giving this message that meat consumption is causing climate change. Well, it's simply not true.
Yeah, there's some very interesting points. I mean, I think also, even if there's some damage via climate change, it's blown out of proportion. I remember the movie The Inconvenient Truth, in Inconvenient Truth from Al Gore, where there's a scene where he shows on the big screen how everyone will be submerged in water. But even that's going to take a long time. You're just not going to wake up one day underwater. It's going to be over a long period of time, if that were true. So it's sort of, they're misrepresenting this sort of, that one day you're just going to be submerged in a tsunami.
Yeah, but you have to understand that Al Gore has made millions out of his projections, because he is in charge of selling the CO2 credits. He directly benefits from those CO2 credits. And it's completely fraudulent. It's purely a way of making money for some rich Americans, and Gore is one of them. And people don't understand it. They're too trusting. They're far too trusting of these people are psychopathic crooks. They're criminals, and they're trying to capture the world. And, you know, we didn't see it with COVID, and we're still not seeing it, but you will see what's happening in Canada. Just look at what's happening in Canada today, how they've got martial law because a group of people drove their trucks in Ottawa. And all of a sudden, this is an emergency. We have to take all the freedoms away from Canadians because of the people who really are wanting freedom back have come to Ottawa and closed the city down. And it's back to Germany in the 1940s. That's what we are facing, and we have to stand up to it.
Yeah, we're definitely in interesting times. But Professor, what is your opinion of the carnivore diet?
Yeah, I follow it mainly, and I think it's fantastic. You know, again, I'm not advocating any diet. I think that I evolved through the Banting diet, where I ate I didn't eat much carbohydrate, but I didn't just eat meat. But I was still eating quite a lot of vegetables then. And I've discovered that vegetables aren't necessary for me, it seems. And so I'm eating far more just meat and dairy produce. And I've got stronger, and I look healthier, and I feel healthier. My glucose control is as good as it's ever been. And technically, literally, I feel like I'm de-aging. So I've just come from gym, where I did things I couldn't do. I couldn't have done when I was a 20-year-old. Obviously, it's because I've now trained for it. But at 72, I say, how old are you? Well, I don't know. I'm doing things I couldn't do when I was 20. So maybe I'm 20 now. Of course, I don't think that. But aging has become irrelevant, because I really literally feel that I've stalled aging and maybe going back a bit.
So yeah, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. The two main arguments against the carnivore diet is, people say, one, you don't get necessary vegetables and fruits that are essential for your gut to have good bacteria in your gut. And the second argument is that you need those vitamins, your vitamin A, B, and zinc, and all those stuff that you get from vegetables. So how are you safe on the carnivore diets against those arguments?
Well, the most nutritious foods on the planet are not fruit and vegetables. They are meat and they are liver and sardines. And those are the most nutrient-dense foods. And if you eat those foods, you will be covered. You see, we don't know what the recommended daily allowance is for all these vitamins. It was sucked out of the thumb by people, by so-called scientists. We do not know what the gut contributes to the vitamins in the body. All we do know is that there are populations who have been eating carnivore diets and they've done extremely well. And they haven't got the chronic diseases that you get when you eat highly processed foods. So I would agree. The argument shouldn't be about the carnivore diet. It should be about the ultra-processed foods. You can't eat ultra-processed foods. You've got to get rid of them from the diet. And that's what we should focus on. So vegetarians, if they're not eating ultra-processed foods, are going to be healthier than people who are eating ultra-processed foods. But many vegetarians combine lots of ultra-processed foods, and they think that Coca-Cola is a health drink, for example, because doesn't have any animal produce in it. But that's nonsensical. So the argument really shouldn't be about the carnivore diet, which, who knows, maybe there are some limitations in it, but the real limitations are in ultra-processed foods and in strict vegan diets. Those are catastrophic. If you follow a true vegan diet and you don't understand what you're doing, you're going to be in trouble. And so we need to focus on what the issues are. And the issues are ultra-processed foods. That's the killer. We need to get people. We don't want to get every South African on a carnivore diet. That's not the issue. We want to get them off the ultra-processed foods onto real foods: meat, fish, dairy, chicken, and vegetables. Those are the diets. But whenever you see a picture of a healthy diet, what does it have? It has fruit and vegetables. And those are not nutrient-dense foods. They are high carbohydrates and they make you hungry and they will lead to obesity in the long term. So that's what we have to do. We have to eat satiating foods, get the foods that are nutrient-dense. And those are by and large animal produce. And then your appetite goes away. You don't get cravings. You're not hungry all the time. And you can control your weight.
Yeah, these daily allowances are quite crazy in some cases. I think it's potassium, it's like 4,700 grams. I don't know how the hell you get so much potassium. But I'll say a lot of people say, okay, I'm not drinking Coke, I'm drinking Coke Zero. That's healthy for me. Is something like Coke Zero healthy for you?
No, of course not. It's sorry. No, it's not. It's ultra processed. So why would you did we drink that 3 million years ago in our evolution? No, we didn't. We drank water and other things, but we didn't drink ultra-processed Coke. No one knows what the constituents are and what their long-term effects are. But all I can tell you is that's not as healthy as drinking water. So stick with water, because you just don't know what these things will do in the long term.
Yes, sir.
You have to store all that stuff in there. It's got to be got rid of or stored. And we don't know what the long-term consequences are. All we do know is that people drinking these drinks are not healthy.
And sugar alcohols and like xylitol and stevia, how safe are they to consume?
Yeah, again, we don't know. And again, they're ultra-processed. So if you really want to be serious about your diet, you wouldn't touch them, because the human body's not been adapted to that. We haven't been selected to eat those foods. So I make the point that the most important thing in your diet is you must be satiated. And if you are searching for sugary drinks all the time and sugary taste, you're in trouble. The only way you can really control your nutrition is have no desire to eat and drink sweet tasting foods. You've got to get this bland diet, or the bland tasting diet, and then you're in control, and then you can be healthy.
So I know a lot of people, if they go on the Banting diet, they know sugar and carbs is very bad for you. But I don't think a lot of people know about the dangers of vegetable oil. So why are vegetable oils so bad for you?
Because again, we aren't evolved with them. You have to understand, everything makes sense in the base of evolution. And humans did not evolve by eating these vegetable oils. Vegetable oils come in about 1910, 1920. So they've been with us 110 years, but humans have been evolving as humans over 3 million years. And we ate animals, and our bodies are designed to incorporate the nutrients from those animals, particularly the fats. So our bodies, the critical components of the body, the cell membranes, are made from fat. And they're designed to be made from saturated fat. That's what makes up these cells. And saturated fat means it's stable. It doesn't destabilize. But the unsaturated fats, the vegetable oils, are highly unsaturated. And so they're unstable. And once they're incorporated into the cells, those cells can't function normally. And they become inflamed, they promote inflammation and a whole bunch of other stuff. So if you want healthy cells, you cannot eat vegetable oils. We focus so much on sugar that we've tended to forget about vegetable oils. But if you look at the biggest change in diet over the last 100 years, it's the increased consumption of vegetable oils. And so one could argue that many of the chronic diseases that we talk about are directly linked. Now, the one disease which is clearly directly linked with this is macular degeneration. So you lose the central vision, because those are highly specialized cells in the retina, which give you your central vision. And if you lose macular degeneration, if you get macular degeneration, you lose the central view and you can only see peripherally. And that is directly linked to vegetable oils. In countries where there are no vegetable oils, they don't have macular degeneration, it doesn't exist. And there are no ophthalmologists. There's no work for ophthalmologists because there's no one with macular degeneration. But you come to the countries where there's a lot of vegetable oils being used, then that's macular degeneration becomes increasingly a problem. So, but that, you see, that tells you, because those tissues are the most specialized. And once they stop functioning properly, you will notice it and your vision will be affected. So you can just imagine that happening to all the cells in your body, that they're no longer functioning properly. That's what happens with vegetable oils. So
mayonnaise is a big no on the Banting diet.
Absolutely, unless you make it yourself, according to the Banting recipes.
So how safe are things like sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds? I know they're high in omega-6 fatty products. So are they safe to consume?
I think there's a difference between eating seeds, because you'll never get enough to give you a real problem. It's the oils, that cooking in the oils and eating margarine. Those are the real problems that'll cause problems, as we understand it. The seeds by themselves probably are not as bad, but they're not ideal. You'd rather do better eating other things.
Yeah, interesting. There's a common conception, I don't know where this comes from, but that if you go on the Banting diet, it's going to lead to gallstones. You're going to get stomach pain, gallstones, and it's going to be hell. So there's probably no truth to that whatsoever.
Now, gallstones are, again, a sign of insulin resistance and a high carbohydrate diet. But people are quite correct. Often it only becomes apparent when you eat a high fat diet. And the reason is the following: that you store these stones in your gallbladder, but the gallbladder on a high carbohydrate diet doesn't function properly. It sits there and it doesn't contract and expel the bile, and therefore the bile collects and causes these stones. And so that's directly linked to high carbohydrate diets. But now you change to a high fat diet, and all of a sudden you've got the fat stimulating the gallbladder to contract. And now it starts expelling the stones, and then you can get real trouble. And it's quite true. And the one thing that happens is the stone goes down the bile duct and obstructs the pancreatic duct. And then you get this condition called pancreatitis. And that can be potentially lethal. So they're quite right. People can die on the Banting diet because they've got an obstructed gallstone. But the gallstone wasn't caused by the Banting diet. It was exposed by the diet. And the diet that caused the gallstones was the high carbohydrate diet. So there's very good evidence that high carbohydrate diets increase the production of gallstones.
That's interesting. So what can one do? Because obviously you don't want to be stuck on the high carb diet forever. So how do you manage that transition and not get gallstones?
Well, you just hope you haven't got stones waiting in the gallbladder to be expelled. But the other thing is that Yeah, in medicine, we always say that it's best to operate when you're healthy. So, if you were to change at 40 and get a gallstone attack, it would be better for you because the surgeons will, with their brilliant skills, will be able to remove the stone. But at 80 or 90, it could kill you. So better to have those stones removed at a younger age. So convert to the diet quicker rather than later.
Yeah. So, Professor, is there anything else that one should be wary of if they go on the Banting diet? Something that might trip you up?
No, I think all the negative comments of your friends. That's what you have to withstand. And people don't like change, and that's part of the problem. And they don't like the possibility that you might be doing something that's actually helping your health. And people, when they go on the Banting diet, they lose tons of weight, they become healthier, and that's very challenging for others, I think. So literally, I scan the literature, and I've got, so many, I've got tens of thousands, literally tens of thousands of articles and thousands of books on this diet. And there's nothing there saying this is a dangerous diet and that the ultra processed food diet is what you should be eating. I just wish that people would get it earlier. My life would have been much different if I had not eaten this processed foods for 33 years and damaged my health. And so it's a concern for me when I see people of my age and I see them aging very quickly. Once you get over 60, you start to age quickly if you're eating this high carbohydrate diet, because your body's we just didn't evolve with this diet. And it gets worse as you get 60 or 70 and you get put in an old age home, and they don't feed you any protein and they don't feed you any fat. And that is a disastrous diet. That is the diet of death. Yeah.
So if it's possible, well, it happened that we evolved with the saturated fats, and that's what we are used to. But is it possible that we can evolve and become used to the bad fats, that thousands of years from now, we can be used to this bad diet of high carb diet?
Yeah, well, the way it would happen is that it would kill off all the people who don't have the genes that allow them to cope with that. And then you get a population that is only able to eat polyunsaturated fats, and that the saturated fats kill them. But that's going to take 1 million years or 2 million years. So it's going to take a long time. It's certainly not going to happen by next week or something. People don't understand the period of time it takes to select out a population that is immune to this disease. So you're quite right. The people who are going to survive the current dietary disaster are those who either go on to the Banting diet, or those who are the 10% who are genetically predisposed and they can cope with it. And the ones who can't cope will die. That they will continue to reproduce, because you don't die at 20. But if their reproductive function is affected by the high carbohydrate diet, which it will be, and particularly by soy and other oils, it could make them reproductively less effective, so that that population will die out. And it will be replaced by only those people that can cope with an ultra-processed food diet, or those who eat the traditional human diet. So that's what will happen. My view is that the only ones who will be healthy in the long term are those who are eating the Banting diet, and that because the other is going to take too long to evolve to make the current diet safe.
Interesting. But Professor, so almost everyone knows that sugar and ultra-processed foods and vegetable oils is terrible for you. But why is it still being pushed? Can you give us some idea of how pharmaceutical companies and sugar companies are so dominant that it's difficult to take them head on?
Yeah, well, I think my experience was a typical example that I was expelled from my university, and ultimately I had to resign from the profession so that I could have a freedom of speaking to you. Because if I hadn't, I wouldn't be able to speak to you, because I would have been reported again for being a medical doctor, expressing misinformation and so on and so forth. And what happened to me was that I was targeted by industry, by the food industry. And I suspect the pharmaceutical industry was also involved. And they are so powerful because they control all the medical schools around the world. Now, you must listen to me carefully, that is the case. If you are a medical school, it doesn't matter if you're North America, Europe, Asia, and you have aspirations. You want to be known as world class, to compete with Harvard and Yale and Stanford. Well, then you have to get money. And the only people who've got money are the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry. So you have to get funded. Your research has to be funded by them. And the moment you're funded by them, you've sold out and you actually start to work for them. And I know because I did that. I worked for the carbohydrate industry for many years and we did some great research. But as long as we were promoting carbohydrate consumption during exercise, that was fine. The moment I said I don't believe in it anymore, I lost all my funding, just like that. Overnight, all went, and my career wound down. Fortunately, it's picked up again for various reasons. But that's what happens. And so when you listen, for example, let's just take the COVID-19 story. Why is it that South Africans, like the rest of the world, are only getting one side of the story? Only one side. Why aren't you getting both sides? There was a person on Twitter or on YouTube, I should say, a famous South African with legal training. And he said, but why don't we bring all the evidence together so we can hear it? So the answer is the one side's being selected out. It's being censored. And that's what's happening with nutrition. And the same with the pharmaceutical industry. It's all being censored, and it's being censored right at the top. And that's the problem. And the great universities, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, have the most conflicted scientists, So we say, this guy's a professor of medicine at Harvard. He must know what he's talking about. Unfortunately not, because he's so conflicted that he can only give you one piece of the truth. He cannot say that carbohydrates cause cancer or carbohydrates cause heart disease, because he will lose his job immediately. He cannot say, for example, that diabetes is a reversible condition, that the most prominent disease in the world today is diabetes. It's not COVID-19, it's diabetes. And diabetes is a behavioral choice which is completely preventable by dietary choices. Now, there's no professor of medicine anywhere in the world who can say that, because the moment he says that, his career is ended. It's professional suicide to say that. I can say it because I'm no longer in the profession and I've got all the evidence. But so that's the problem. So the reason why this diet is sustained is because the politicians and the academics are controlled by industry, and they can't say anything about changing anything that will affect the profits of the pharmaceutical industry or the food industry.
Mm. Yeah, we've had a few doctors and professors on WorldView that have lost their jobs because they took on the pharmaceutical companies head on. And yeah, that interview with Chief Justice Mogoeng was very interesting. Yeah. He's a very charismatic and articulate person.
There you go.
But Professor, don't you think part of the problem is accreditation and that title of Professor and Doctor, MD? Because whoever has a monopoly on that training gets to decide what you learn. So isn't that part of the problem, that we need to move away from that sort of education?
Oh yeah, so that we have to develop a whole new way of training. Absolutely, education has been completely changed. It must be totally independent of the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry. So if I was professor of medicine at the University of Cape Town, for example, or any Free State, any university with a medical school, I have two choices. I can either bankrupt my university Faculty of Health Sciences by saying, we will no longer support the pharmaceutical industry, we will no longer support big food, and so the faculty will collapse. Or I can say, we'll continue to do exactly what we're doing and we will harm South Africans' health. That's the choice. So how long that lasts for, I don't know. All I can say is that this COVID thing has exposed the dishonesty of the profession. And the public will slowly begin to realize that they were told a bunch of lies. And many people lost their jobs and their futures and many other things because of the lies that were supplied by the medical profession. And so they will start to say, well, if the person could lie about COVID-19, maybe they're lying about the statin drugs that I'm meant to be taking. Maybe they're lying about the insulin that I need to treat my diabetes. Maybe they're lying about all the vaccinations that children need to take. And then it's time that we develop a new discipline, which is real health. You see, medicine's got nothing to do with health. Absolutely nothing to do with health. We must just make one distinction. Surgery, obstetrics and gynecology, trauma are unbelievable. They are the best in the world. There's nothing that can touch them. If you're in a car accident, you better get to a hospital and have a good surgeon look after you, because these men are and women are brilliant. And the anesthetists are astonishing. And they the product of 200 years of increased knowledge in medicine. They are utterly brilliant, and they need to be praised for what they do. They are astonishing. They make our lives much more safe and healthy every day. But when it comes to chronic disease, which is diabetes, heart disease, the profession is utterly hopeless, because it doesn't treat the real cause, which is a nutritional basis. Instead, it asks you to take these pills which don't help you. So we must make that distinction, and that health has got nothing to do with medicine. It's all about your behavior choices and your nutritional choices. And that is not taught at medical schools. We're taught, this is the diagnosis, this is the treatment, it's these pills. Don't talk to the patient. Don't ask them how much exercise they do, what they eat, etc., how many hours a night they sleep, what's their psychological stresses. We don't ask those questions because we don't have the time to address them. But the new profession will look at that and will teach people as a totality. It'll treat people as a totality.
I recently spoke to a doctor, and he made a very interesting observation that so-called chronic illnesses are just bad eating patterns transferred from the parents to the children. That's what a chronic illness really is. That's why depression and anxiety or whatever is in the family, because the family eats wrong.
Yeah, exactly. But we live in this food environment which is so toxic. And I mean, as we know, if you go to the supermarket, there's only a couple of places where you'll want to select your food. You won't go to the central aisles where there's all the cereals and grains and the breads and the high sugary drinks. That you don't want those. So, but it's difficult because it's cheaper to eat that way, or it's apparently cheaper to eat that way, because you don't understand what the long-term costs in terms of poor health and lost opportunity, work opportunities, and so on. That's not part of what you factor in.
Absolutely. Well, Professor, I see our time is running out. This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for being on the show again. I want to give you one last opportunity if you want to add or say or plug anything that you want to.
Yeah, thanks, Donald. I think that, I like to use my own experience that I was committed to this low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet because that's what the professors told me, and I believed them. And I advocated it for 33 years, and my health went downhill as a consequence. And I'm just so sad that it took me 33 years to realize that the diet was killing me. I shouldn't be alive today. I've had a diagnosis of diabetes for 12 years at least. If I'd probably tested myself, it would be more like 15 years. And the only way I've kept myself alive is by eating this diet, which reversed my type 2 diabetes. I'm not cured of it. I may still develop problems in the long term, but all I do know is, and this is what I would like people to understand, that if I die tomorrow, I would say, well, at least I got these 12 extra years and I did the best I could. I did everything I thought I should do, I did. I've got no regrets. And it's really sad to meet people who don't understand that they come with pancreatic cancer, which at the moment is pretty irreversible, but it's a dietary-related disease. And it's linked to insulin resistance and high carbohydrate diets. So if you've got pancreatic disease and you've got 6 months to live, it's a pity to learn then that maybe if you changed your diet 20 years ago, you might not have had the pancreatic cancer. And the same with Alzheimer's disease and other cancers and heart disease. It's just a pity we do know how to prevent these conditions. But you're not going to hear it from the professors of medicine. You have to hear it from the alternate group of medicine. So what I would say is educate yourself and don't just believe what's coming from the mainstream and the mainstream media. You really need to look after your health and not to regret it when you discover, oh my gosh, I'm like Tim Noakes. For 33 years, I did it all wrong. But I didn't change. And now these are the consequences.
Absolutely. And who could disagree with that? And I've also gone on the Banting diet for 3 years, and it's been a massive success for me as well.
Yeah.
But to our viewers, if you've made it this far, you most certainly enjoy the content. Please consider liking this video, sharing it as widely as possible, and subscribing to our channel. My name is Donald, and you've been watching WorldView.